Oh, Mrs. Hitchcock, did you see the full moon tonight?
I'm more interested in exploring your feminine mystique.
Peekaroo, I see you.
Did you hear that?
All I can hear is the beating of your heart.
Oh, Mrs. Hitchcock, stop! 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 Okay, what the hell?
Hi, hello. So, first of all, I kind of hate that I need to say this, because recently I've seen that somebody who was mildly critical of a recent season of Drag Race has been sent death threats and doxxed. And I just want to say, don't fucking do that. I don't know how else to say that. Please don't. I'm making this video mostly anonymously, and I'm not really going to tie it to anything else I do online because a lot of people scare me. A quick content warning. I will be discussing a lot of issues related to various topics that may be triggering or alarming to a lot of people, and I will list them here. Originally, this video was just going to be a small vent about lesbians being the butt of a lot of jokes on Drag Race and exclusion of drag personas other than queens as opposed to other forms of drag media. But in writing and researching, I realised that there was no way to cover the lesbophobia of the show without also covering the transphobia of the show and various other gender-related issues with the show that have happened since its inception. I also had a recent communication with a teacher that I used to work with, expressing that he was quite happy that he had replaced J.K. Rowling with RuPaul for his students to look up for an assignment. I was also talking to a straight woman that I know who is also a teacher, and she just started watching the show recently. And when I told her what I was working on, she was really shocked and kind of just assumed that RuPaul had always been a champion for trans rights. And this just completely went over her head. Both of these situations really made me want to focus on the whitewashing of RuPaul's more bigoted opinions over the years. So I really want to stress that, first of all, it is my utmost desire that nobody views anything I have to say about this show in a malicious way. I don't intend to, and I do not want this video to be about cancelling any drag performer mentioned in it. Lesbophobia, transphobia and problematic actions or opinions that I believe may be held by some people are not an excuse to harass them or use my own feelings on their actions or words as the opinion of every marginalised person. There is a lot of discourse around this, and I am well aware that there are lesbian and trans fans who want to excuse previous actions or words, and it's not for me to decide for them. And so before I start, I want to say that I focus mainly on topics I can speak towards that affect myself and my community. But Drag Race has a long history of issues with gender, racism and classism that in this video I don't feel well enough equipped to speak on as thoroughly as I do with the topic at hand. And these shows are important pieces of media that have helped me navigate my own gender presentation and identity. Arguably without seeing the gender-bending portrayals of femininity that are presented in many portrayals of drag, I might not identify as the femme lesbian that I do identify as today. Especially as I become more comfortable referring to my own relationship with gender and lesbianism as non-binary. This is really a labour of love, fueled by wanting to see my identity given more loving representation in this medium and platform, without fetishization, resentment or mockery. And I am not a trans woman, but trans women and trans lesbians especially are the most vulnerable and demonised members of my community. Especially in this shithole country. And I hope this video does them justice, and I really want to thank my friends who helped me with this video, and especially my trans friends for helping me make sure that I did cover their experiences to the best of my ability. And I will be heavily criticising elements of the show, some of the people on it, the fandom, the showrunners, and in some cases elements of drag itself. And I really don't want to start this off on the wrong foot. I have and always will be a fan of so many talented artists that the show and other shows inspired by it have shown. And I say these criticisms not as a takedown, but as a plea for potential progress. So a spoiler warning, later on in this video I will be covering some pretty heavy spoilers for a future season of Drag Race. And so here's the time code, and I will give a warning beforehand. So I am in no way equipped to give a full rundown of what Drag Race is to viewers who might not already be aware, and definitely not equipped to give a full rundown of the huge amount of seasons and spin-offs that there are now. So basically, just in 2009, the first season of RuPaul's Drag Race aired. A reality competition that styled itself as a mix of classic drag pageants, America's Next Top Model, Project Runway, and other similar formats. The show pits several, and in later seasons over a dozen, drag queens in a competition to find out who is America's next drag superstar. Since the show's inception, it's been riddled with issues that are spurred on mostly by its producers and showrunners holding regressive or stagnant views. In earlier seasons of the show, then closeted trans queens such as Sonique, Kenya Michaels, Jiggly Caliente were encouraged to pause or hide their transitions, as the appearance of trans contestants were viewed as cheating or not real drag, depending on who you asked. And I don't really want to speculate heavily on anybody's personal life, so I won't go into this much, but added pressures from careers and opportunities that are denied to trans people can really contribute heavily to not wanting to come out. In 2018, RuPaul sparked a major backlash in the fandom and LGBT community with really horrifically transphobic comments, essentially comparing their transitions to cheating, again repeating the sentiment that drag is men dressing up as women. Singling out one transgender queen in particular, Peppermint, who had come out as a trans woman while competing on the show recently. He claimed that he wouldn't have allowed her on the show if she had begun transitioning prior to taking part. This is a reality that transgender drag performers know all too well, being aired to the world as if they're not worthy of the art form that they've had the biggest historical role in creating. But even before this acknowledgement, there have been several huge instances of blatant transphobia from RuPaul himself. And it was widely known in the fandom that RuPaul, the producers, and the cisgender culture around Drag Race propped up transphobic and misogynistic views of women on Drag Race. In Season 6, contestants, including a not-out transgender woman, had to view cropped photos and judge whether or not they were
Female
or she-male.
If she's a biological woman or a psychological woman.
a challenge that was not only horrifically transphobic and forced the contestants to say slurs, but body shamed several cis women alongside it. And while it can feel easy to dismiss these incidents as, well, that was a long time ago, it really wasn't. It was 6 years ago, and people were rightfully outraged then. And these were not just isolated incidents. It seemed like every single time RuPaul had an interview and they mentioned trans women, he would diminish their experiences. This time was around when the show started getting a lot of criticism for its transphobic aspects, including She-Male-Gate, in which former contestant Carmen Carrera feuded with RuPaul and several contestants about the use of
Oh, girl, you got she-male.
which played every episode, along with songs by RuPaul such as T-Word Chaser. RuPaul became notorious for blocking and blacklisting queens who commented negatively towards his transphobia. Carmen herself has been a very controversial figure outside of this issue, namely her abuse of other trans women she deems as not passing. But without going in depth to both Carmen and other trans queens' reactions to this, she was right about this transphobic aspect of the show. And in hindsight, pretty much everybody agrees it needed calling out. After these incidents, the showrunners apologised for the mini-challenge, they stopped using that song, and they replaced the announcement with this.
She not ready to have hers.
I really want to stress that these large public incidents were not the first time that trans people had taken issue with RuPaul's transphobia. He just never had to apologise for it before, on such a large scale at least, because they didn't have the platforms to criticise him and have people listen. I found a really interesting post from 2012 by Autumn Sandine, the first US service member to successfully petition a gender identity change on her military records.
RuPaul is apparently willfully ignorant of how pejoratives such as are used. RuPaul is utterly wrong in his assertion that is never used in a derogatory sense. In the old 2009 interview, RuPaul said,
"There are more things to do in this life than to try to correct people with how they should refer to you. That's your problem. That's not their problem." And listen, if you're offended by a name that somebody calls you or something, whatever, you gotta take that up with your therapist.
Well, it's not just my trans peers and my problem when epithets and pejoratives are used to refer to us. It's also the problem of the people who use the terms when they know people are offended by the terms. It's an issue of sensitivity to the concerns of others. And, well, some of us in the community don't want to reclaim particular words that have been used against us as epithets. So RuPaul espoused essentially the same view to the Dallas Voice in 2009 as the one he espoused to the Huffington Post in 2012. Personally, I sat through the Angie Zapata hate crime murder trial in Greeley, Colorado in early spring of 2009 and listened to Angie's killer refer to Angie as it and thing. I've personally had it, thing, shim and used among other terms as epithets against me. In one case, I was called by a white supremacist, and in another case was referred to as Pam's Houseblend's house by an anti-transgender activist. I had a federal marshal refer to me as a shim. Many of us in the LGBT community are personally aware that societal authority figures sometimes refer to us by pejoratives. I will also hope people in the LGBT community take the use of a term that a significant number of trans people find offensive seriously as well. I will hope that the LGBT community members take it seriously when a public figure in the LGBT community is embracing and advocating insensitivity towards the significant number of trans people who find the term to be an offensive, demeaning and dehumanizing term. And Logo should look into this too. Logo needs to own that one of their reality show stars has made long-running comments about terminology a significant number of trans people find offensive, and to us in trans communities who object to being characterized as well, he's told us he will tell us to fuck off, and that he will call us the very pejorative we object to.
It feels strange to talk about instances only 10 or so years ago, as if they're an entire lifetime ago. But that's how the internet works, I guess. I literally could not find any reference to these outside of some pretty intense Googling. Even back then, RuPaul was getting criticism for speaking over trans women on how the reclamation of slurs that target them should happen. And people just didn't listen outside of spaces that cared about the experience of trans women. And in a lot of cases, those spaces are just trans women. This is the 2012 interview that Autumn was referring to, in which RuPaul also has a lot more to say on the matter, and is directly firing back at criticisms of other people who said the slur.
It's ridiculous. It's ridiculous. Words, it goes back to grade school. Sticks and stones, you know the rest. The thing is, you have to look at the ego. You have to follow the money and the payoff. And the payoff is that the ego wants attention no matter what. So it will try to get it wherever the hell it can, whether it's positive or negative. So you have to ignore it, basically. You have to starve it out. And unfortunately, in our culture, one person can write a letter to the network and they shut something down. It's unfortunate, but I love the word teasler. And no one has ever said teasler in a derogatory sense. In fact, you have to go to the intent of the person saying it. Of course, Lance Bass, his intent would never to be derogatory. Never. So, that's really ridiculous. I gotta tell you, my 10th grade teacher, Mr. Pinnell, told me. He said, Rue, my real name, don't take life so seriously. I didn't get it then at 15 years old, but trust me, as the years went on, I got it. We live in a culture where everyone is offended by everything. Everybody's like, oh my God, I'm offended. It's an ego-based culture we live in. The ego has everything to do with identity. And so, drag actually mocks identity. So it doesn't really make any sense. I think in my world, in my circle of friends, we mock everything. Everything is up to be mocked. Don't take anything seriously. Right, because they've earned the right to do it. And in the ACT UP age, we called ourselves queers because we earned that right. We took the word back. But in reality, once you go even deeper, you have to come from intent. And black folks call themselves the N-word all the time. It's because the intent is coming from a place of love. If the intent is coming from a place of hatred, that's different. But you can't legislate intent. You can't. There's no way to do it. So the truth is, you have to fix that individually on a one-by-one basis. If someone calls you a green Martian, would you be offended by it? No, you wouldn't be. Why? Because you're not a green Martian. But if you're offended by someone calling you a teasler, it was only because you believe you are a teasler. And listen, if you're offended by a name that somebody calls you or something, whatever, you got to take that up with your therapist, kiddo. Because you know what? You're not going to be able... Ooh, now you've got me riled up. I live in the West Village, and everybody wants to make the world baby safe, soften the corners so nobody gets hurt. It's like, kiddo, this world, there will be blood. There will be blood. So you better toughen up now, or you're going to suffer the consequences later.
I really want to stress that I don't bring this, for example, 10 plus year drama up to cancel RuPaul 10 years later. I just want to stress that this doesn't come out of nowhere. Trans women have been silenced over voices like RuPaul's for years, and he has specifically spoken over them when they have voiced their discontent with what he's saying, as if he knows better about slurs that target them. And I really can't say for certain here, this is just my own conjecture, but I don't think RuPaul ever really stopped having these opinions. I think he's just a shrewd enough businessman to not say these things once public opinion turned against him. While making this video, I reached out to a number of trans lesbian friends of mine to make sure that they were comfortable with what I was saying. Many of them had a lot of issues with Drag Race, RuPaul, and a lot of aspects of drag itself for the transphobia within them. I don't want to speak over them or for them, so I will be brief with some of the criticisms that I received. Drag is uncomfortable for a lot of trans people, and especially trans lesbians. Quite a few of the lesbians that I asked said they felt affected by massive amounts of transphobia from RuPaul and various shows' contestants, criticised certain trans women for competing on the show after everything RuPaul has said, and have felt unwelcome in their own local drag scenes. I am well aware that some trans lesbians may watch this video, already disliking the show for their treatment of trans women and depictions of lesbians, and come away thinking, God, drag is worse than I thought. And I personally hope that I don't paint that view, as this whole video is just an extremely narrow look at a tiny element of drag culture as a whole. Misogyny within drag and gay spaces has been rampant for so long. There's not really a way to phrase this other than cis men control everything to the detriment of everybody else. As my own example, as a bit of a sideline, my girlfriend and her sister, both bi and pan women respectively, were once refused entry to an infamous London gay bar, there to see a girl group of all things, because the bouncer didn't buy that they were queer enough. Women and many non-binary people often aren't viewed as being active participants in LGBT spaces, but as tourists, no better than the drunk straight girls going to a drag show for their hen night and to laugh at the spectacle. This issue is heavily compounded by the huge decline in spaces for queer women that don't include men. Even my most local lesbian bar has now changed its branding to a gay bar in order to survive, and the huge decline in lesbian bars is a phenomenon that's been noted for a long time. Exclusive lesbian and sapphic spaces struggle to stay in business the same way that gay male spaces do. Which brings me to talk about more inclusive spaces. When Season 3 of Dragula, in my opinion a vastly superior unaffiliated drag show in terms of inclusivity and respect for its competitors, opened its doors to drag artists other than AMAB drag queens that season, AFAB non-binary contestant Hollow Eve vocalised their discomfort with the term fishy.
The word fishy is a really big issue for me. Please don't use that word.
All right, well, let's talk about it. Fishy is a word in our community.
So Priscilla drops the fish bomb on the table, and instantly I step in, and I'm just here to educate, because I think a lot of people use the word and don't understand the actual context of how it was created or why it is used. You don't get to take someone's body part, talk about what it's like when it's not pH balanced or it's sick, and like talk about passing and whether or not a woman passes as a woman or a trans woman passes.
Most people usually don't like being reduced to their genitalia, especially AFAB people who live with the stigma of being told that their genitals smell and have been historically shamed for their genitals and encouraged to clean themselves with potentially harmful products throughout generations. Hollow has met with a lot of backlash from some parts of the fanbase. Already viewed as encroaching on a gay male space, now they were trying to take away their drag lexicon. This season of Dragula is probably my favourite. This is the first drag television show to ever have a lesbian winner. Landon Cider is a phenomenal lesbian drag king who dominated a huge chunk of the competition with his iconic looks that challenged a huge portion of the Drag Race fandom's perception on what kind of drag is okay for a show about drag queens, taking runway categories that a lot of the time were tailored towards drag queens and expressing them via his own style of drag. But even this show couldn't escape the institutional misogyny that women and non-binary people face. Hollow Eve was eliminated after a look was censored for television. Saving their used tampons for months, they were going to criticise the demonisation of menstruation and treatment of women. Ironically, their menstruation was demonised. Because the show had been purchased and distributed by Amazon this season, they now had to follow along with FCC guidelines that banned the depiction of menstrual blood. Even the colour red wasn't allowed. Instead, Hollow had to last minute cobble together a sanitised version of their original plan look, not even allowed to use red paint or red makeup, and went home after their look was criticised as looking unfinished. And they later expressed that originally they had planned to have a used tampon skirt. Interestingly, at a similar time on Drag Race, Manila Luzon also had a look depicting menstrual blood censored. Originally going to just be a play on the runway assignment pads, she wasn't allowed to use this runway look and had to use a backup. What's interesting about this is, according to her Instagram post at the time, RuPaul specifically called it in bad taste. I raise these examples not so much to directly criticise the shows themselves or RuPaul himself. These censorship rules are products of the platform that they're distributed on, but they highlight a very male-dominated standard that the shows are inherently propping up and do not exist in a vacuum. They're fueled by production, the contestants and hosts themselves, and the audience. After all, even RuPaul in his transphobic interview where he devalued trans women's drag, said that drag is a big fuck you to male-dominated culture. But even as a gay man, he didn't see the misogyny, specifically the trans misogyny, in his comments and attitudes towards who he casts on the show, and his misogynistic attitudes towards the treatment of women on the show. And given how long this has been going on for, and how much effort went into changing this, despite his apologies, he may still feel this way, and continue silently judging the competitors like this, just never saying the quiet parts out loud. The show puts such a huge focus on workroom conversations, where it gives the queens a voice to speak for themselves and highlight issues in their lives and issues of underrepresented minority groups. And then the rich people in charge don't listen, or fake listening. Once again, going back to that interview where RuPaul said disgusting comments about a trans queen, this came out after she had come out on the show, and everybody seemingly voiced their support for her. None of these shows really exist with an entirely gay male audience anymore, and arguably the most mainstream of shows like Drag Race, they may not even be the majority anymore. And with the advent of a larger audience, the minority voices become heard by more and hopefully listened to more than not. The show is finally beginning to move forward, and more than just cisgender gay men are finally being listened to. Trans voices are finally being heard. But as a lesbian, I can't say the same for us. Before I talk about the specific issues with Drag Race and lesbophobia, I would like to raise a few issues so that people don't think I'm intentionally skipping over certain viewpoints. I am not bisexual, and I personally don't like the label queer used for myself, but Drag Race definitely does have issues with depictions of bi, pan, and other not homosexual contestants and biphobia in general. For a lot of the show, the assumption has always been that everybody on the show is a homosexual, which has blatantly never been true. Recently, Scaredy Cat, a contestant on season 1 of Drag Race UK, is bisexual and in a relationship with a woman who is also a drag artist. They were met with a lot of derision from certain aspects of the fandom and the general public, seen as invading a space for gay men by some, which you can directly contrast with the more accepting community around Dragula, where a queen like Disasterina, who is married to a woman, was a huge fan favourite. I don't consider myself well equipped to speak on bisexual issues, and I don't want to speak over any bi voices that wish to, so I won't be talking about it directly from this point on.
I'm Dee DeBerry from Tampa, Florida with Tampa Bay Act Up. I'm a lesbian with HIV. I'm a pissed off dyke, and I want my rights back.
I haven't been in a march that's been all dykes, ever. Not 20,000. I mean, I can't even think of a march that was less, that was all dykes. Mostly, you know, when we've had marches, they've been women's marches, lesbian and gay marches, not dyke marches. That's what was most different about this, was that it was all dykes, and they loved it. They loved it. It was just the best. I mean, I've been waiting for this to happen for I don't know how many years.
Lesbian history is deeply intertwined with the expression and defiance of gender. To call lesbianism cis women attracted to cis women, or just women attracted to women, is as false and outdated as calling a drag queen a man dressing up as a woman. Non-binary and gender non-conforming lesbians have existed since the dawn of time. We just haven't had the words for them. Throughout history, people who we do not and should not consider lesbians now, such as trans men and bisexual women in relationships with women, both of which have historically fought long and hard to be considered their own respective identities, have been lumped in with lesbians before their own marginalised voices were ever considered. Lesbians, to me, and the vast majority of the modern lesbian community, are women and non-binary people who identify as lesbians, who are not attracted to people who identify as men. When I say lesbians in this video, I mean all lesbians. Cis lesbians, trans lesbians, non-binary lesbians, lesbians who use she, her, and lesbians who don't. Pronouns do not inherently signal gender, and non-binary people are not a third gender. They are people who don't fit into the binary. If you disagree with me on this, you will probably disagree with me on most things I say in the video, and I believe you would benefit from listening to more lesbian and trans voices. Gender-bending lesbians and sapphics have historically played huge roles in the art of drag and cross-dressing. This isn't a new thing, they've always been there. They just aren't being appreciated or represented in the biggest platform that the LGBT community has. As a quick aside, while recording this, drag king Tenderoni, who is, to my knowledge, a lesbian, just won Alaska Thunderfuck's inclusive drag pageant, which is still unfortunately named Drag Queen of the Year. This is now another space that is now excelling beyond Drag Race in terms of inclusivity and respect to drag kings and lesbians. I feel like every video that touches on LGBT representation in media begins by talking about the Hays Code. It's hugely important, and honestly I feel like I couldn't do a good enough overview of it, so on the screen I will be pointing you in the direction of people who are actually experienced in talking about it and have some really good videos on it. To sum it up, depictions of LGBT people were not allowed in media for a very long time, at least not positive depictions. And for a long time after, and still today in a lot of ways, we feel the effects of such depictions and tropes that have formed around it. Lesbian representation in media is troublesome at best. To put it succinctly, if we're not predatory or evil, we're suffering, dying, meaningless side characters, marrying a man at the end, a pity party, or relegated to punchlines. And Drag Race is no exception. I kind of want to apologise in advance before I start this because I know for a fact there is a lot that I'm going to miss. I work full-time as an essential worker in the middle of a global pandemic, and I don't have time to rewatch every episode of over 15 seasons of Drag, over 13 seasons of Untucked, every associated show and extra online content to try and compile every lesbophobic line in existence. There will be ones that I've missed, and probably lots of them. So I'm just pointing out the ones that have stuck in my head or bother me, and I hope they get you to thinking about other experiences of it. So to start off with, what representation do lesbians have in Drag Race? Well, you have two gay men being in a relationship or being shipped in one by fans, two gay men kissing as a joke or when they've run out of material, the writers writing a stereotypical butch lesbian or an annoying lesbian,
I'm a strong gay woman!
or a predatory lesbian.
Oh, Mrs. Hitchcock, stop! Stop!
In an acting challenge, and the contestants then hating these roles as a result.
Please don't let me be butch.
And then you be the butch real estate agent.
Not because they're stereotypical, but because, surprisingly, they're always the worst received and tend to go home.
Right, it was the lesbian.
I guess so.
Season 1 of Drag Race gave us potentially the most representation out of any season, which consisted of a group of masculine women who were all fighters, didn't wear makeup, and didn't know how to walk in heels. I actually can't say for certain as to whether or not any of these women were lesbians, as the word was never said any time in the episode, despite the term butch being used disparagingly multiple times. To a young me nearly 10 years ago when I first watched this season, this kind of focus on how bad they were about aspects of femininity reinforced the self-hating stereotype that I had of gender non-conformity being ugly or lazy. In fact, Ongina, who went home this episode, was criticised for wearing trousers on the runway.
I did think Ongina looked a little more boyish than usual.
Well, a woman in a pantsuit is really great. A drag queen in a pantsuit, not tucking, is a man.
In these early days, this could have appeared as if the show would only get more inclusive and include other LGBT people's perspectives than then-out cis gay men. But this wouldn't really pan out. As I've mentioned, the showrunners made their distaste for both transitioning queens and anybody who wasn't AMAB or gay apparent for a long time, and the first queen to openly come out as a trans woman was Monica Beverly Hills on season 5. For the vast majority of the show, the only lesbian points of views we tend to get are guest appearances or celebrity judges. And lesbians still continue to be the punchlines of many jokes.
I'm gay! I
was gonna wait till college to experiment, but okay.
Who says I'm not fun? Is this because I'm a lesbian?
It's because I'm gay, isn't it?
I am an honorary dyke.
Get those nuts away from my face. Well, hello, gorgeous. I'd like to let you hide in my hedges any day.
I just had a vision.
Really? I'm a lesbian now. Oh my goodness. That's so Raven. That is so me.
I really want to say that I don't doubt that the queens on the show have the utmost respect for lesbians in their community, and it's important to stress that these often aren't conscious biases. And in the case of the acting challenges, the majority of the contestants didn't write these, but someone did. For a long time on Drag Race, the only lesbian roles in the acting challenges were explicitly butch, and all the queens hated playing them, because by playing the butch role they were playing a role that would either be criticised for being too manly or not manly enough. These roles didn't fade out because of the portrayals of lesbians as predatory, laughing at, isn't it funny that the feminine queen has to play a lesbian?
Right, it was the lesbian.
Season 4's acting challenge featured the main jokes of both of the acting challenges being both predatory lesbian guard in a prison and lesbians hate penises. Season 6's Drag Race Me to Hell featured a sanitised but unquestionable rape scene as its opening to one of the challenges. In the other, the emphasis was on how butch the character was, with the hosts of the show laughing on the sidelines about how funny it was that a feminine queen is playing a lesbian. Not just butch, but explicitly lesbian, that these roles were the lesbian role. Not all of these are explicitly negative. In fact, Alexis Matea's Snatch Game as a pregnant lesbian Alicia Keys is still considered one of the best Snatch Game performances ever. I don't want to shit on her or this performance. The comedy behind this is very much that it's not Alicia Keys at all. But it says something that the first assumption about a, quote, lesbian character is to hit on every woman in sight.
Amber.
Oh, she got her number, yeah.
Oh, now I'm writing a new song. It's called Amber.
Amber, okay.
Yes.
I think there should be an Amber Alert out for Alicia Keys.
Recently, in Season 2 of Drag Race UK, Lawrence Chaney, who is a personal favourite of mine, bombed Snatch Game and in the process turned a joke by lesbian icon Miriam Margolyes, playing on her crude sense of humour about being starstruck and overreacting as a young girl, into a joke about being turned on by a sexy man.
You don't sugarcoat things. Do you get starstruck when you meet people?
I do sometimes. I remember when I was young and I met Laurence Olivier.
Wow.
That was, I used to collect autographs at the stage door, you know, and he came out and I remember so distinctly that I started to cream in my knickers. I could feel it. I could actually, I went all funny. You know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean.
You can only describe me as a thespian lesbian. Thank you. Cream.
Cream? Well, you got half of it right.
Well, it reminds me, Rue, of in my early days.
Yeah.
I met Laurence Olivier for the very first time, and I creamed my knickers. No, genuinely, I was frothing at the gash. Something came over me. I thought it was him.
In many acting and improv challenges, having two queens making out in a hilarious over-the-top lesbian scene is kind of considered the norm if you need to end on something crazy and out there.
Do it again. Yeah.
Don't speak. Don't speak. I missed you. Oh, listen.
Oh my God. You can catch Nina and Tina on Channel 0 at 4 a.m.
There's a depressing feeling consuming media for your community and realising that you're always the butt of jokes but never being represented. A lot of the primo cringe content around Drag Race tends to take a swing at this. There's a big subset of the Drag Race fandom that ships these real-life actual human people together, to the point where they even address it or encourage it on the show or outside of it. What's notable about a lot of these is that, with the exception of the actual relationships that have come out of appearing on the show, these shipping dynamics are all their drag personas, and in the case of a lot of them, they're vagina-having cis-female lesbian versions of their drag personas. I don't really want to harp on too long about the strange dynamics of shipping real people together that happens in this fandom, and the really transphobic implications that a lot of them have, because for the most part it is literal children doing it, and inherently a lot of cringe content is about that. But the queens have certainly encouraged it at many points, because no publicity is bad publicity, I guess. Especially when it's catering to teenage girls shipping real-life adult cis men together as the cis lesbian counterparts of an outfit they wore one time. But there is a reason to this, which I don't really want to shit on them too much for. There's a reason why so many sapphic fans don't care if the queens are saying slurs.
I love dykes, even dykes say yay!
As long as they're saying something about them. And not many of them seem to acknowledge that it could be because they're all heavily invested in a show that has never included their sexuality properly. So instead of seeing sapphic or lesbian drag artists compete on the show, they make do with pretending that the drag personas of these mostly cis men are lesbians. It is generally agreed upon by most reasonable people that the reclamation of slurs should be limited to the minority that the slur is referring to. There tends to be a perception among a lot of drag performers such as RuPaul and other queens who have been in work for a long time that it's a rise in the trend of political correctness that's led to the previous use of slurs and other acts not being seen as funny anymore. To an extent, there is a level of truth to this. Most people don't find drag queens using the T-slur funny anymore, and certain performers are still having blackface performances come back to haunt them. But with the slur dyke, it's only recently that people have been facing backlash for it. But I disagree with their assessment of political correctness, in that I feel political correctness the majority of the time is just minorities being listened to and taking their feelings into account more. Maybe having affected friends and realising that they're actual human beings who don't like being stereotyped or mocked in public depictions. RuPaul and other queens used to say that the T-slur was never, ever used against trans women, that it was a slur for them, despite trans women begging them not to say it. For the most part, even though for some of them these were begrudgingly and angrily, the queens have calmed down on the use of the word dyke. But like most progress, it didn't come without the shouting down of people affected by it. As a man, you can in fact stop using dyke as a punchline or an aesthetic without pivoting into whining about how this means you can't show your support for the dykes on bikes anymore. Apologies regarding this tend to come in the form of, okay, I'll shut up because teenagers have been whining. It is easy to pass off a lot of this as, it's a show for drag queens, why would lesbians want a part in it? But I do feel like that is reductive and a sign that Drag Race may age poorly when the future of drag continues to evolve around it. Years ago people said the same about trans contestants at all, and having a trans man appear on the show, like we now have with season 13's Gottmik, felt impossible. We have other televised drag competitions open to all drag performers of any type now, and what happens when, say, in 5 years, when Drag Race decides to maybe open up and let on a drag king or an AFAB queen who isn't trans compete? Will those memories of previous seasons be soured a little while we think about what we could have had for some of those older seasons? A lot of this comes down to the fact that Drag Race, for all intents and purposes, is not a pageant. It's not a fair competition in the right sense of the word. It is a reality television show made to entertain, and in this sense, the winner doesn't matter. They're not interested in fairness, they're interested in good television. Ask yourself why, with the huge amount of pointless dancing and physical challenges that don't impact a disabled person's ability to be a drag superstar, a wheelchair user has never been cast. Ask why change on the show only ever happens after a massive public outcry, or why background checks seem barely relevant until a sexual predator nearly won the show and had to be edited out at production's cost. Ask why more allowances haven't been made for disabled queens to compete. Ask why Evie Oddly was encouraged to hurt herself to prove that she could keep up. Why injuries go unmentioned by the contestants until it means that they couldn't walk or compete. Ask why Tamisha Iman had to dance with a hula hoop and was criticised for the way that her outfits fit, while she was doing the whole competition recovering from cancer and wearing an ostomy bag. Ask why production continues to bait and incite hatred against queens of colour for more views. Ask why there are iconic people who appeared on the show that have talked about struggling with finances and homelessness or living in poverty since appearing on the show. Ask why RuPaul continually traumatises the contestants on the show, prodding into their darkest childhood abuses and snubbing them if they don't give them the reality gold that he wants.
Oh my God, like, I just want to say thank you so much. Like, it is such an honor to be here, such a pleasure to meet you. You have no idea, like, what this, just giving her, you know, that whole, like, everything I've ever wanted to say to her. And she turned to me and she said, "Nothing you say matters unless that camera is rolling." And that broke my spirit.
What would Pearl have to say to little Matthew?
Oh, God. I'd have to start with a warning. You're about to enter, like, the toughest... You're gonna enter the toughest years of your life, and, gonna suck really bad for a long time, and people are gonna f you up and take advantage of you, and people are gonna be looking at you from across the room for so many years, and you're not gonna understand why.
Do you understand why now? Yeah. You're a star, baby. Thank you, Pearl.
Thank you, Pearl. And why production provides contestants who may have never appeared anywhere other than their local stage or their bedroom before, with little to no mental health support, both during production and after the show has gone to air, to an audience in the millions. In a way, there is a culture in the show itself and in its fandom that encourages a lot of the things mentioned here and a lot more. Seasons of Drag Race have been churning out faster than new ones have even finished airing at this point. It's easy to dismiss it as a show that's been going on so long that the racist, transphobic and otherwise bigoted parts are all so long ago. But each season there's always a cycle of microaggressions or worse that oppressed communities have to deal with. Just in the past few years, there have been queens who have appeared on recent seasons turn out to be COVID deniers or conspiracy theorists, outed as sexual predators, have performed in blackface or been explicitly racist, and that's a lot to put out into a society while preaching love and tolerance. At this point in 2021, a winner from less than 2 years ago was outed as having a secret Reddit account where she defended herself against allegations of transphobia by pretending to be a black trans woman. Here's that spoiler warning for the end of Season 13 and All-Star 6. Gottmik of Season 13 is a trans man, and if I'm lucky enough to get my shit together and finish this in time, I'll be spoiling a little bit by saying that she will be in the top 4 of this season. And Kylie Sonique Love is also going to be on All-Star 6 and is rumoured to be a frontrunner. Having a potential trans winner of the show after a long history of transphobia opens up a lot of doors as to the treatment of drag artists that aren't just cis gay men, and may encourage the showrunners to continue in their casting diversity. Maybe in like 10 years I'll be celebrating the first lesbian drag race winner in season 29 of Drag Race Uruguay. I do have a fear that lesbians competing on the show, and especially trans lesbians, may face a huge amount of invalidation, especially those who previously identified as gay men, as non-lesbians are not the most understanding of the phenomenon compet, the way that lesbian and gender identity interact together, and the experiences of trans lesbians. But seeing your people being represented on screen, finally without it being turned into a joke, is pretty meaningful. And this is the main reason why I didn't want this video to be too negative, because I do see a way forward for the show to go in its treatment and portrayal of trans and lesbian people. Drag Race is currently hurtling forward at the speed of light, with more seasons and spin-offs coming out to the point where that fatigue is starting to set in for a lot of fans. The fact that it's taken this long to get even this close to this level of representation when the world of drag is so much more diverse than what we see on one 60-year-old cis gay man's show does suck. But by the looks of it, Drag Race isn't going anywhere. RuPaul and Michelle are just going to keep on pumping out seasons on an international level from now on. This is the most public platform that any drag artist will ever get from now on. And I really hope that the L in LGBT gets to share it someday. If you've made it this far, thank you so much for watching, and I really hope you enjoyed it. I'm really sorry for my voice the whole way through. I didn't realise how mouth mushy I am until today. I've been working and volunteering a lot over the last few months, and I started the script in early February, and it's taken me a long time to sort it out. Originally, I wanted to include a part about the non-binary representation that have been in recent episodes, and that didn't happen mostly because I wrote the vast majority of this before Ginny and Bimini and also Davina De Campo had their talks about the issue, and I ended up struggling for time on writing it and where to put this. I'm really hoping that this doesn't get us butchered by copyright as much as my draft upload did, so hopefully I haven't had to cut any huge segments out. I really want to thank every single person I know who read my script and watched my draft video, and I love you all.